All right, good afternoon to you all. Thank you so very much for having me as a part of this. I'm thrilled and honored to be here today at the invitation of the roundtable, and specifically for Dr. Jack Spangler, whom I'm engaged in a little bit of work with up at Harvard, and it's a great honor to be here with you all today. My role, I've taken sort of a slightly different approach than many chefs have, and really was paying attention to my ingredients and sort of began to really dig deep into them, and found more and more of my interest moving towards the systems that provided for my kitchen rather than what I was actually creating in it. That role has taken me to National Geographic now, where I work as an explorer in the fellow program, exploring the confluence of ecological and human health. And so this is a perfect gathering for me to learn and glean so much knowledge from you, so thank you for sharing all that you are. Bottom line is that standing up on a pedestal asking people to care about the oceans has relatively been ineffective. And we have brilliant, inspiring people like my colleague at Dr. Sylvia Earle at National Geographic. But by and large, the choir has been aggregated. And I think the next great leap is to really not tell people that they should care about the oceans, but rather to listen to people and then repeat back to them why they already care about the oceans. And what I love about that is that everybody on this planet cares about dinner and health, primarily. And in fact, those two things are intimately and inextricably linked, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. When I was growing up here in Washington, D.C., my parents took two things very seriously. The first was reading, and the second was food. Through reading, we imported the ideas of tens of thousands of people, opinions, and experiences into our lives. And that was just such a wonderful benefit and a blessing for us. And then through food, we imported the cultures of the people that lived all around us. I was born and raised here in Mount Pleasant, and we went to all the little corner bodegas that served the Eritrean, Ethiopian, Korean, Taiwanese, El Salvadorian, Guatemalan, Honduranian populations. And food was not only a physical exploration for me of cultures and of tastes and textures, sights and sounds, but it was also an exploration of the cultural world around us. I've learned through food to better know the people that populated my everyday lives, the boys and girls that I'd spent my afternoons playing with. And through reading, we learned how to listen. We learned how to absorb, not necessarily to agree, but to acknowledge other ideas and opinions. And food is an amazingly powerful tool, as administered through the great bastion of culture that we have left to us, which is really the family dinner table, the communal meal. And that's what I really want to talk about today. One of my very favorite quotes that I read when I was growing up, John Hersey, famous writer, fabulous writer from Yale, and in his book Blues, a book about a conversation between a stranger and a fisherman. In our quest for food, we begin to find our place in the systems of this world. And I've always loved that quote, because I think it quite accurately and simply describes that we are not sovereign over our resources, but rather we are because of them. And that makes a lot of sense to me. When I was growing up, I also had the great fortune of spending my summers down on the Patuxent River, a tributary of the great Chesapeake Bay. And there I spent my entire days in search of food. I would run down the pilings first thing in the morning, run down the dock first thing in the morning, pulling off the pilings, giant male crabs. I'd throw back any female or any blue crab, male that was under 6 inches in carapace. I mean, just keeping the monsters. And by the end of the day, I had a giant bushel. With every third cast of my fishing line came back a bluefish, a perch, a porgy, a croaker, a striped bass, a skate, a shark, an eel, a ray, whatever it was, there was bounty in these waters. And when I was 25 years old, I had the great fortune of stepping into my own as a chef, at first writing my own menu, a very personal narrative. And so I said, what do I want to communicate with my menu? What does my narrative say? So I looked to my past. I looked to this bounty with which I was so familiar and fluent. And I called up and I said, hey, send me some striped bass. I want some bluefish. Oh my God, this is going to be great. Send me some oysters. I want some blue crab meat. Oh my God, this is fabulous. And the other end of the line said, kid, what are you talking about? Those are gone. Dummy. What do you mean gone? We already ate all those. What else do you want? Oh, whoa, okay. And it was at that moment that I realized that the guiding hand of natural selection is quite firmly holding a fork. The world has a little four-prong imprint on it nearly everywhere we decide to be. And being in D.C., surrounded by all the nonprofits and wonderful NGOs that are doing great work on ocean conservation, I began to ask why. And I had great friends and mentors that really introduced me and engaged me to the systems by which food ended up at my back door and thereby onto my guest's plate. And I asked, how could we let the things that I find so delicious disappear? That's dumb. Wouldn't we want to keep those around? Well, yeah. But the answer that I got back was really, I didn't really like it. It didn't sit well with me. The answer that I got back was largely based on the idea of the tragedy of the commons. That seminal Garrett Hardin idea from '67 in his paper. The idea that man acting in self-interest, logical self-interest, will ultimately lead to the destruction of the commons. That acting in self-interest, I will eat that last bluefish and striped bass. And we very nearly did. But ultimately, that's not what interested me. I mean, if you had come into my restaurant and I had told you a story of tragedy. Hi, welcome to Cafe St. X. Tonight we have 2 specials for you and a drink special. The drink special is called Miasma, and the 2 entrees are Shame on You and Woe is Me. Can I get you some bottled water? That's not hospitality. That's not what I was selling. That's not the joyful celebration of the ingredients that we're so blessed and fortunate to have. That wasn't the conversation, the narrative I wanted to share. And so I began to look deeper for an alternative narrative about environmentalism that wasn't based on a story of bad human bad, an empirical measure of how we have impacted ecosystems, much to their detriment. And what I realized is that tragedy is not in the destruction of the commons, but it's rather in no longer having access to the resources that we so desperately and vitally need from those commons. Tragedy we do not find in oil spilling into the Gulf of Mexico. Tragedy is in the preventable human error by which we disrupted our ability to maintain our jobs, our cultural identities, and to feed ourselves. It is in the solemnity and remorseless working of things, says Alfred North Whitehead, that we find tragedy. It is a human construct. But that was some of the best news that I had heard in a long time. Great! You're telling me that I'm the problem? Fabulous. The other side of that coin means I'm the solution. The choices that I make for dinner can both make my body and the earth sick. Fabulous. The choices we make for dinner can heal and restore. And so I moved into a narrative about the human story, the human narrative, not how we impact ecosystems, rather how we are impacted by them, which is the very essence of this conversation here. And I began to call this the communion of the commons. A story of how we are impacted by the systems on this planet for our benefit, for our cultural identities. And this way is a more positive dialogue. It's a more hopeful and a more human dialogue that engages people to consider our place in the systems of the world in front of us. And this is what this conversation about ecosystem service is about, maintaining our place in the systems of this world, sustaining our reality. Now, many environmental campaigns have traditionally been tools created in response to acute and isolated issues. They're actionable ideas, often, that engage people to participate in solutions. However, I found that many of these environmental campaigns failed to acknowledge the larger framework of really what it was they were trying to accomplish, to measure the initial cause against the larger context of the action the campaign asked us to perform. And we have many examples of this. I mean, we have low carbon footprint, we have recycling, we have organic, sustainable, local, MSC, fair trade. I mean, these things run the gambit in terms of elucidating the impact of our consumer choices. But just to pull out 2 examples of this, of how the initial intent did not carry through to the ultimate action. Organics meant and implied that it was a system by which the earth was not harmed and we would greater profit corporally by the products that we used. It was an idea of health and wellness. And now we have organic cigarettes. Congratulations. Not, I think, where we were supposed to go with this. Recycling, again, oftentimes held up as the kind of pinnacle of success in environmental campaigns. And yet, for all the reduce, reuse, recycle, mantra that we have, it has done very little or nothing at all to dispel our preference for a disposable goods economy. We've actually accelerated the pace of disposable goods coming into our market. And so, in fact, many of these environmental campaigns actually end up strengthening a confirmation bias. They actually help us to justify current systems and current behaviors in many ways. And these campaigns often forget to ask the larger question inherent in our concern for the environment. And that is simply, what are we trying to sustain? And this question drives at the deep-seated cultural anxiety that we suffer from greatly when it comes to discerning what it takes to thrive in our contemporary world. Thrive. And I propose an answer to this question. What are we trying to sustain? Well, quite simply, I think we're trying to sustain ourselves. And yes, this might be the antithesis of the deep green ideology, but the bottom line is we're trying to save what we eat, where we live, and the healthful, productive lives that nature affords us. I believe that this answer, and any legitimate answer to this question, really necessitates three things to happen in a broad spectrum of disciplines. And as food is a primary driver of our interaction with nature, and a principal cause of some of the most detrimental forces that we visit upon nature, and here, in this conversation, oceans specifically, I'd like to take the remaining time that I have to talk about and lay out what I believe are three important contexts of actions that extend beyond the isolated analysis of facts. The first that I suggest, well, there's my question again. The first step that I propose is we have to develop logical policies which protect ecosystem services that protect our needs more so than our desires. In some cases, this might be a legislative action, exemplified by a current conversation that we are deeply engaged in over the proposed pebble mine in the Bristol Bay area of Alaska. In Bristol Bay, we find home to 46% of the global abundance of sockeye salmon. From that, we derive 14,000 jobs. 7,500 native Alaskans rely on that bounty for 52% of their diet. We create $500 million plus in income off of that fishery every year. And that fishery, while global fisheries are defined by destruction, collapse, and just catharsis, Bristol Bay fishery is defined by abundance. It is an example and representation of almost as best man can do to act and live in concert with nature. And what we want to do, what is proposed now, is to put the world's largest open-pit mine at the very headwaters, the very engine of this productivity and abundance. This mine is going to be worth an awful lot of money. It's going to employ an awful lot of people. I mean, this is gold, molybdenum, copper, things that we need. However, a lot of people oppose this. And the people that oppose it, the fishermen, the native Alaskan corporations, a lot of these people do so while floating on metal boats using GPS machinery that uses copper wiring and gold circuitry. This is not a story about anti-mining. We must mine to ensure that our economy endures. But we can't mine here, not in this place. We have to decide whether or not we are going to save jobs, human resiliency in terms of food security, whether or not we're going to save this global abundance, or whether we're going to choose gold. We have a strategic oil reserve. Why not a strategic food reserve? And this is the very best candidate for it, Bristol Bay, protecting what we need over what we desire. Or this policy could be enacted in terms of a business scenario, protecting shareholder interest. And that is a real opportunity, and one exemplified by sort of what you wouldn't expect to be the leader in the cause of sustainable seafood, and that's McDonald's Restaurant Corporation. For over a decade now, they have known exactly where all of their fish is coming from, and they have worked very hard to restore a fishery. Here's the story behind it. Late 1950s, I believe, in a small corner of Cincinnati in a heavily Roman Catholic area, one McDonald's franchise owner was, funny enough, nobody was buying his hamburgers on Fridays. I wonder why. So he went to Ray Kroc and said, I want to do a fish sandwich. There was a little competition involved, and all of a sudden the fillet of fish was born. Originally, it was made from halibut. Then it was made from cod. Well, the cod disappeared. And so then they went to New Zealand hoki. And that collapsed pretty much. And so they moved up to Alaskan pollock. Well, then they began to see signs of the pollock fishery collapsing, and they said, no, not again. We have spent far too much money retraining people, redesigning logistic systems, retesting recipes, those pesky, pain in the butt. You know what? We're just going to go save the fishery. It's so much cheaper to do that. And they brought that fishery to its knees. They weeded out all of the bad actors. They enforced existing regulations and policies and legislation. They used the threat of, you know what, if you behave outside of the framework of the law, we're just simply not going to buy from you. And in bringing this industry to its knees, they actually saved the industry and made it much more profitable, and now represents the biggest catch that we have in America. But you know what? This was all done in shareholder interest. It was lower cost to go save the fishery than it was to recreate the recipe. Fine with me. The next actionable step acts almost as a check and balance to the story I just gave you. And that is, we really need to provide an economic engagement and support for the access points to our commons. It's not enough that we protect the commons. We have to protect those who provide their resources for us. If there are no farmers, guess what? There are no farms. No farms, no food. No fishermen, no fishery, no seafood. Therefore, we must save the access points as much as we save the resource itself. And this is something that environmentalism has not really done a very good job of incubating. This idea that the human interests, the human economies and economic systems are as vitally important as are the environmental ones. Currently, we subsidize farms with their giant farm bill. But a farm is an economic system. A farm is governed by imperatives of increased production and lowered costs. The success of farms is more and more judged by shareholders. But instead, what we need to do is encourage an alternate model in which farmers are seen as the principal, and in which farmers are judged by society for what they contribute to their communities. And this is going back, hearkening to the Jeffersonian ideal of the agrarian hero, the agrarian ethic, upon which a lot of this country's traditions are founded. This is not a new idea to us. It's a new application, or it's a new context for the application of this idea. And this can be done simply by shopping at local farmers markets, by diversifying and seasonalizing our demand. But this action shifts the importance from fulfilling our needs rather than delivering on quarterly filings. In fisheries, we subsidize commodities fisheries operating at way over capacity, fleets much too large, much larger than we need to catch what is the allowable quota. And these models force a very diverse ecosystem into an economic constraint and efficiency model which demands uniformity. Instead of subsidizing the fisheries, we should be subsidizing the access points to regionalized or direct from source products. What this enables is for fishermen to participate diversely in an ecosystem, to offer to consumers what the oceans give, not to take only from the oceans what the consumer and market wants. Market demand determines the value of products, and in this way ensures that only a few species are profitable and thus are landed and brought to market. But all seafood is equally profitable when looked at in terms of fulfilling human needs. The current system creates waste and skews towards demand. Demand being defined by sushi in LA and shark fin soup in Hong Kong, and not towards sustaining human health, job security, or oceans health. This is a market issue. This is a consumer opportunity as well. When we walk into a grocery store with a preordained recipe in hand that we downloaded from the internet or my book, and you walk in and you say, I need salmon. I'm sorry, this is Washington, D.C., sir, and it's November. There's no salmon here. Yeah, whatever. My recipe says salmon. What we do is we force the system to create what we want. What this has led to is 91% of the seafood that we eat in this country is imported. 66% of the seafood that we eat in this country, or that we catch in this country, is exported. 3% or less of what we import is inspected. We have no idea what's coming in. And thus, 70% in some cases, especially in sushi restaurants, the seafood is mislabeled, fraudulently, or sometimes just in error. The result has been a complete decoupling of the product from its source because we get what we want instead of eating what's accessible to us. If we go into a grocery store, if we go into a restaurant, we say, hey, what's best, what's freshest, what's most economical, and what's going to make me look like a rock star to my family? Oh, well, sir, we just had this beautiful Spanish mackerel brought in from the Chesapeake Bay, hopefully not Iceland, and, you know, it just came in this morning. Look at it. It's sheen, shine, bullets, and little orange, speckled dots on it. It looks like this warrior breed of fish. I mean, clean, lean, succulent flesh. Woo! Okay, cool. Sold. Oh, wait, it's $4.99? Awesome. This is what we need to do. This is how we need to participate as consumers, acting in concert with ecosystems, diversifying demand. In this way, we focus on ecosystem services rather than on supply chain services. Now, these first and second points are very important, and they're sort of important in tandem to each other. But it's also exceptionally important, maybe equally important, that we understand how we access ecosystem services and how we use them. This is not just about production models. This is about what we use it for and what we expect to get from it. The third point is that we need a behavioral shift between fulfilling our desires and fulfilling our needs. There is no technical solution to any resource management problem that can succeed in absence of a complementary behavioral shift in how we use that product. There's a great parable to this story in the Bible, the story of Jesus and the loaves and fishes. The story goes, Jesus is preaching at the seashore. The masses throng to see him. Somebody has the bad idea and says, hey, I'm hungry. You got any food? And everybody's, uh-oh. And from this, Jesus, asks his disciples, hey, what do we got? A few fish, a few loaves of bread. And from this, one of the great miracles ensues that he's able to fully satiate everybody there. Furthermore, he instructs his disciples, gather the crumbs so that nothing might be wasted. And then, this is just this brilliant idea. But we are not gods. We cannot recreate that. We can't find more fish in the ocean. We can't just magically make them appear. And we definitely should not plow under more rainforest to plant more wheat for more loaves. So what's the solution here? What's the human narrative? Well, take what you need, share the rest, leave the system intact. While the technology of aquaculture and increased crop yields on land may very well give us a necessary and vital boost to production, no alchemy will ever make an all-you-can-eat buffet sustainable, neither for our health nor for the planet. So how do you think the parable of loaves and fishes in the Bible would be rewritten if the first few people in line had taken and be like, oh, cool, a whole fish and a whole loaf of bread and thrown out half of it? But that's kind of what we're doing right now. There's a story in Peru, the anchoveta. It's the world's largest single-species fishery. It accounts for 10 billion to 15 million pounds of fish per year. Yet 98% of that never goes to feed a human being. It all goes into reduction fisheries, much like the menhaden that Cynthia was talking about. This is not the highest and best use of our product. On this planet, we can feed the needs of 7 to 9 billion people. I believe that, but we'll never feed the desires of 7 billion people, or even half that many. Needs are finite, desires are infinite. Environmental sustainability and human health at their bottom line are about better nourishing people with the food that we have. In the U.S., USDA estimates that 1 in 6 people in this country are food insecure or live in food insecure households. The CDC says that 1 in 3 Americans are overweight or obese. We are not using our resources to their highest and best purpose. Food is supposed to sustain us. And in nature, health is simply the default. If you're not healthy, you don't stick around. And while medicine may ease discomfort and cure disease, alleviate acute symptoms, only food can give us health. Only food can truly sustain life. But man cannot live on bread alone. We know that statement too. But we can be no healthier than the foods that we eat and how we consume those foods. The foods we eat can be no healthier than the environment that it comes from. Therefore, by simple geometric proof, human beings can be no healthier than the environments that sustain us. If humans desire to lead healthy lives, they must equally pursue both wellness and environmental resiliency. To do otherwise would be to ignore that fundamental tenet of logic, so eloquently proposed by Hippocrates. Primum non nocere. First, do no harm. This principle does not allow for corporal and environmental health to be divorced from each other. And the danger in the conversation about ecosystem services is that each is analyzed solo, in isolation. And we've seen the consequences of such a myopic pursuit before. And we've seen this in the aftermath of the Industrial Revolution, which was the great deconstruction of the organic model, when we first valued the parts more than the whole. And in preparation for today's talk, I went back and I read Stuart Udall, The 76 Project, Agenda for Tomorrow, which is a fabulous book, a narrative in which he pretty much lays out all of the social services based on environmental services that we need to thrive in a contemporary world. And just a quote from him, "The tragedy is that only consideration that unifies the entire field of action will be able to provide a sound base for building wise priorities. Analysis, by definition, is a breaking down of the whole into its constituent components. But knowledge and perspective do not emerge from the facets of fragmented subjects. They develop only by reuniting the pieces within a meaningful context. How we eat largely defines how the world is used, and what we eat defines how healthy we are. So let's pursue the resiliency of our bodies and communities and planet. Let's take only what we need. Let's share the rest. Let's leave the systems intact. Celebrate wellness over consumption. In the communion of the commons, we engage a cultural dialogue about ecosystem services that can encourage people, businesses, doctors, and governments to participate in the highest and best use of our commons, which is simply to maximize the profit of our human experience. Thank you.